There's Adam Griffith, the great Griff, with Peter Chesbrough, who's giving us a discussion on hydraulic surface mining in Devon and Dartmoor. So take it away, Pete.
Hi, Adam. I don't know if you cut out at the beginning.
Let's sort that
I don't
out,
know
yeah.
if which side the recording. I
Yeah.
don't know whether, but yeah, let's do. We can merge this on as one jolly introduction anyway. Yeah, I'm going to be looking at some my hypothesis for some hydraulic surface mining on Dartmoor, ancient hydraulic surface mining on Dartmoor. These are sites that I found, and I'll try and explain sort of my process and how I came about it and found the information. And I'd just like to say, for all of you Arthurian nuts, I'm afraid this is all going to be about mining archaeology. In fact, there's absolutely nothing even vaguely to do with what I'm interested in history. This is all just done from landscape archaeology, essentially, just me walking and looking at features. And I want to make that point again, that all of this information, all of these ideas have come from me going out and looking at what's there and what's the evidence on the moor. I've not gone out looking for something in particular. I've gone through a whole process in order to sort of hone this sort of hypothesis. So sorry if you're expecting something else, but yeah, we'll give a bash at some surface mining. Let's go. So yeah, so this is the southwest of Britain. This is Cornwall, bordered by the Tamar River that's round about here. And then this here, this big lump here, this is Dartmoor National Park. Now, I live around here, and I was very interested historically especially in the sort of megaliths. We've got lots of stone rows, we've got some stone circles. And really, I sort of passed by the sort of Bronze Age stuff, because we've got quite a few archaeological landscapes preserved in Dartmoor. We're very lucky. So as I say, there's some Neolithic stuff. There's a dolmen up on the north, just off the north of the moor actually, and a Scorrel stone circle, which is an impressive piece of architecture. There's also a medieval landscape which involves mining and farming. We've also got sort of industrial era landscape preserved as well. We've got granite quarrying, moor mining. So the sort of granite batholith that makes up the moor, which sort of creates this massive uplift today, and it's what the rocky tors are, the exposed peaks of this batholith. This is also fantastic for metals, and Dartmoor has an incredibly rich mining history. Records go back at least to sort of the Middle Ages, with sort of reference to early medieval work as well. So and all kinds of things were mined on Dartmoor: gold and silver, tin, lots of tin. I've heard one antiquarian say that the Dartmoor actually has some of the purest tin. It's not so laced with the tungsten as it even is in Cornwall. But he's the only person I've heard say that, so I don't actually know how true that is. That antiquarian will come up again in a bit, actually. So I was really into sort of say the megaliths and stuff. And I was watching CF Apps, however you pronounce its videos, when he used to do great stuff on different sites all over the world. And I used to love, a good look into articles, scientific, as well as sort of things in newspapers and things like that. But I was really fascinated by the idea that you could just sort of have a skim around on Google Earth and find stuff. And what's quite amazing is that some sort of things started coming up. So I'll just go and have a look. We'll just have a look at some images, and I'll just have a look, talk a bit more about the mining history. So the earliest mining recorded is a type of mining called streaming or stream works. And this basically involved damming up a river, or bringing in a river from further upstream by digging leats, in order to bring water to the riverbanks and use it to do the work. Basically, use it to wash out the ore, which is pretty much best found in riverbeds, because the river has already done a lot of that sorting for you. It's already sort of separated out the ores from some of the waste material you don't want, and deposited it somewhere you can collect it as well. So further action from water continues to do that work for you, not only, as I say, collect the ore, but also to separate it from impurities as well. So and this is a great example here, where you see these sort of it looks almost like ridge and furrow or something like, and these are just the waste piles left. You get some incredibly beautiful stones. For people who know Dartmoor, they'll know that these areas, although sometimes a bit of a nightmare to traverse, they can be very boggy and dangerous. You get some absolutely fabulous looking bits of material. You also end up with these massive, they call them escarpment cuts, where the whole bottom of the valley has been completely destroyed and reorganized, and you can see the first stream into the river. This is pretty much assumed to be the oldest type of mining on Dartmoor, and they reckon it was definitely used throughout the medieval period, and there's record of it being done in, say, about the 12th or 13th century. I'm not quite sure. And what it means is, because this was done over and over again and done to an incredible extent, it means we can't ever say, what's the old mining and what's the new mining. Firstly, there's just no datable material in there whatsoever. But also, the destruction caused by later mining basically eradicates the mining work of before. So this is something about Dartmoor. We move sort of away from the mining and have a look at some of the archaeology. So one thing we have on Dartmoor is this Bronze Age landscape. Now, the Bronze Age landscape is made up of, firstly, sort of from the Beaker era, we've got a lot of different types of burials and stone rows. But for me, the bit that I never really used to find interesting and now find the most fascinating is the settlements. We've got over 5,000 roundhouses on Dartmoor, which are, I should say, are attributed to the Bronze Age, because not every single one of them has been dug up. They've dug up a few here and there, and generally material points to the most use in the Bronze Age. So they're all Bronze Age, although there are some examples which have been dug and turned out to be Iron Age, and there's also evidence of reuse throughout into the Roman period as well. What these are, we've got a map of something absolutely pretty amazing here. These are called the Dartmoor Reeves. Now, the reeves are pretty unimpressive to look at when you see them. They're just sort of low walls made of granite and earth. But when so these walls are extensive. This is a big system, and it's one of the biggest preserved systems of Bronze Age walls, especially in this part of Europe, if not Europe or the world. It's pretty spanking. But there are a couple of issues with the reeves in terms of their interpretation, what they've been used for and when they're dated to. There isn't any really good dating evidence. It's just never been found. A few things have been found which seem to be in the right context, but really they're not from underneath the wall, or it's not solid evidence. So there's plenty of other walls on Dartmoor, built for different reasons, for agricultural reasons, for mining rights reasons, for just landowning reasons, So there are a lot of assumptions about these, but we're going to be mainly looking at this southwestern part of the moor. And it's interesting to note we don't have a lot of these sort of parallel systems here. Now, when you look at these on the East Moor, you can see that they are actually they seem to be very much to do with the roundhouses in the area. So you can make the assumption whoever built the roundhouses probably built these reeves as well. I think that's fair enough. And within them, there's evidence of agricultural activity as well. But over on this side, there isn't quite, as you see, there's just no way as many as there are on the eastern side. Now, this part of the moor is generally today still a bit warmer and nicer than this side of the moor. This side of the moor is very rocky and steep and barren in places. It's the valleys are good little refugiums, but generally it's a bit rough and ready. However, this is where we also see some of the greatest density of houses. So, but we'll go into that in the future. We'll move on from reefs. Here's a roundhouse. So here's a dig on one they did. And they actually call it, I'm using the term roundhouse, which is generally actually used for the Iron Age equivalent of this sort of structure. On Dartmoor, and especially on OS maps, they call these hut circles, which, as you can see, is a complete bloody euphemism for an absolutely stonking structure using massive blocks, some of them easily a ton. Now, there's nothing here. These aren't like Egyptian impossible blocks. You know, we're not talking about 50 people can do, and people can do with the right tools and training and attitude. But the general idea is that the people living on Dartmoor at the time and living in these hut circles, is they were subsistence farmers. And when I think about like hunter-gatherers or subsistence farmers, I think about what they're doing in terms of calories. Now, if you can build a house, you know, are you going to build a house like this? You know, if all you've got to think about eating and feeding yourself through the winter and stuff like that. I mean, you see Bronze Age houses like Dartmoor and Orkney, where they didn't have wood, so they built things from stone. There was plenty of wood, especially during this period. Dartmoor would have had old growth forest, which was as old as from coming out of the last ice age. It would have had wood, and just off the moor would have been arboreal rainforest, and there still remains of that today, you know. So these people were choosing to do this. Now, the material is abundant. There's plenty of granite around, don't get me wrong, but this is a lot of work for building houses. Like, look how dwarfed these people are. And there's also still wood used in the construction. You know, they find post holes and things like that. So, you know, it's not like wood wasn't available. Anyway, we'll move on. So this is the place that first caught my eye, and this is the closest place to my house where when I was scanning on Google Earth, I found something of interest. And what really caught my eye is these beautiful patterns of stone, which seem to go all the way around off the top of the hill. I just thought, wow, that is fantastic. Like, very interesting. And now there's quite a few other things of note on here. So we can see our Bronze Age settlements here. There's also another one you can't quite, it's not so clear here. There's also plenty more of it all in this area, but the underbrush has covered it for this photo. We can also see this is a pretty major road here. Well, I say major, it's major for Dartmoor, but it's a pretty small road running to Princetown to Plymouth. We've got a main footpath. This is just a footpath that goes up through the settlement. This here is a reeve. So one of our walls we were just looking at. This is the Great Western Reeve. So it's actually the longest of all of them on Dartmoor as well. And this one is the local one. It's called the Walkhampton Common Reeve. And the Walkhampton Common Reeve starts on Peak Hill, goes across Sharpetor, and this is Leaden Tor that it's crossing here. Well, I should call it Leaden Hill because the actual outcrop and Tor is a bit further on. But we'll go with Leaden Tor or Leaden Hill for now.
Yeah.
And also, can you see there's quite a lot of these shaded and dark areas as well? Yeah, so there's lots of holes. So there's loads of stuff going on, but it was really these lines. These were the things that drew me to this site. So this is what the lines look like on the ground. sort of when I was looking at them on the satellite, I thought it would look like something piled up, like a wall or something. And I thought, has someone built these to make these patterns? Very sort of strange. And when I came and had a look, you actually have something very different. What you actually have is a dip in the ground level, which sort of goes up either side. And this dip has then exposed the rock in the ground. And, in one way or another, I've seen this hundreds and hundreds of times on Dartmoor. It's water erosion. This is what any dried out little river, stream bed, leak, dike, ditch on Dartmoor looks like, especially if it's been dry for a while and the grass grows. It lowers down, it's clearly rounded the rock in places, it's cleared out. And I shrugged it off and went, yeah, it's natural. It's loads of water. It would have been beautiful because this hill would have been covered in these little waterfalls, but, fair enough. And I couldn't find anything about it on the internet. And what was interesting is, for people who are science communicators, you might want to think about this, is that I couldn't find. There is actually an interpretation, a geological interpretation that's different to mine, which I will go into later. But I couldn't find it because I didn't know the jargon words to type in. I was typing in, wobbly lines of rock and all this sort of stuff. Little waterfalls on leading to nothing coming up. So and really it's because I couldn't find the jargon. But that's probably a good thing because it means that I went back and back and back and looked at it again and again and again. So then by the time that I learned something else about it, I'd already been through it in my head. I'll crack on. So I started to notice that these things weren't actually alone. You can basically only see them on the satellite, or some of them on the satellite, but you can't see some other features. So here we've got about 5 or 6 of them coming down the hill in rows. And I'm actually standing in a massive ditch. And this bit of underbrush here is a pile, which is clearly material that's been dug out of the ditch to make the ditch and piled up on this side. And it's a funny shape, present shape. And it's quite clear that all of these this ditch is designed for these to run into this, basically. That there is a correlation between the two. It's quite clear. It's dry now, but if it's rainy, this thing does sort of get wet again. And next to it, oh no, this is me sort of approaching it from another angle on a very nice day. So you've got this crescent shape here, and you can see there's still puddles up with water. And this is the piled up material, and there's piled up material here in the middle as well. But it's clearly man-made. It's not complex. Here's me stood inside it. Here's the left-hand side. Here's the right-hand side of it. The rock lines are coming down the hill here. We got some semi-glabata mushrooms there, but this isn't a mushroom talk, so we'll move on. And right next to that ditch, there's another smaller one. And this is, again, it's clearly someone's come and dug a hole in the ground. Like that's not up for questioning. And there's even a little what should we say, overflow here, which continues to go down the hill. And to this day, the underbrush doesn't grow where that overflow is. So it's clearly affected the ground. And also, as you go down there, you'll see, and I'll bring this back up later, there is rock's been exposed from the effect of the water scouring. Other places on the hill, I started to find things which are also clearly man-made, but constructions this time. So there's a range of sizes of these great big, I say big, so I say there's a range of sizes, but they're piled up rings of granite, and they're all found again on these rock lines. You don't find them anywhere else. They're clearly not homes, they're not houses, because there's no flat bottom to them. They're just masses of rock. They're on the side of steep hills. And also what's interesting is that, again, I couldn't find any mention of these online. Nothing on the historic environment record, nothing on various, amateur compiled databases of Dartmoor, what am I saying? Antiquities. Because Dartmoor, I mean, one thing I should spot in is Dartmoor's a well-explored place with lots of people who are really interested in it. So to find something off a main road, off a main footpath, which wasn't a scheduled ancient monument that doesn't appear on amateur databases, was a really sort of strange thing for me. Like it seemed unusual. Now it's possible these actually appear in a book by one of the many antiquarians who studied on the moor that I just don't have access to. There was a guy called Butler in the 90s, Samuel Butler, who did 3 big volumes of Dartmoor antiquities. And if it's anywhere, it's probably in there. But as far as I know, if something's in Butler, it's on the historic environment record as well. So you should be able to find it online. The thing is, there just wasn't one of these on a rock line. There was quite a few, and not just on one part of the hill, but all around the hill. Kept on finding them, right? That's here, beautiful example. The rock line comes down the hill, and where it terminates, we've got, again, a semicircular feature made of granite, which seems to be collecting whatever's coming out of these things. So there seems to be, you know, there's a man-made correlation. You know, although the rock lines look very natural and organic, there seems to be man-made stuff involved. And I thought, you know, what was this? You know, like, and the first thing my head jumped to was like, oh, the Druids had it as a place of worship. You know, they had these beautiful grove of waterfalls going into a pool, and they used to throw lovely bronze swords into the pool and stuff. And I was like, no, got to get that out of my head.
It's hard sometimes, isn't
it? It's no, that's nice. That's, you know, right. Move on. So I thought, right, let's start having a look at more of these rock lines. Let's look at every single one and see what else there is. So I started looking again. So most of these ring-shaped structures were in this area here. Although I have now found more on this little ditch at the beginning. I don't know if you can see there's a slightly browner area here, and that's the bigger ditch. And this is the smaller one with its overflow coming down in amongst the stuff. So I started to go and have a look at these things here, these darker areas, because I thought, you know, it's weird stuff. Let's go and have a look. Here's a nice shot on a sunny day. It just captures all the shadows from all these excavations. Here's a bit of a blurry one. So what I found is that all of these holes in the ground, guess what? They're at the termination or near the termination of a rock line. So they are not randomly placed at all. They are, again, I found more, all of that man-made stuff is to do with the patterns of the rock, all of it. There's loads of them.
Yeah.
They come in generally the same shape, which is rounded at one end, open at the other end, and sometimes, like this one, there's a wall at the end or in the middle. So I think I've got a couple more here. Here's one. Oh, here's one with the dog. The rock line comes down the hill here, comes at the end. Here's another one. Rock line comes down the hill, rounded at that end, open at this end, but there's a wall on it.
Yeah, it's where. Yeah, I see.
Now, when I started going through these methodically and looking one on one, when I started looking at them one on one, all of them started lots more man-made features started cropping up in them as well. And now there is an interpretation for these features. So unlike the circular things which no one had found, these are actually listed, and people do have an interpretation of them. So I'll probably talk about that in a minute. So here's another one. The rock line comes in down here. It's rounded at this end. But what's interesting on this one, the wall comes across, and there's just like a little gap here. And I found another one very similar to this as well. So again, there's like they're sort of walled off on the bottom end. Which is what makes their other interpretation a bit silly. More on Lead and Tour, I started to find more different man-made things. So this is slightly northwest of where we were looking. So here, these are the rock lines. So do you remember I was saying that I'm actually going to stop calling them rock lines and start calling them scours, because that's what they are. When we were saying at the beginning, there's a in the earth, and that's what exposed here to two semicircular features. This one's quite big. You can see the darkness of it. This one's a bit smaller, but you can see it very clearly on the ground. And again, this is something that I can't find on the historic environment record. So, you know, if someone's seen it on a book, this is called Route Rundle. And this is, you know, as I say, just a little bit west of Leadenhall, not far at all. We can see the remains of the prehistoric settlement in the modern day farm, which is quite nice. It's pretty cool. You know, don't often get that, so that's cool. And also just below this, you can't quite see, but there's a very heavily streamed river. So tin mining going on. And it's probably worth remembering that pattern as well, of having scours, having a prehistoric settlement, and then having a river below, which has also been tin mined. All right. Here's that same feature on the on satellite. Can you see it's an absolutely massive bank, semicircular bank? I'd say it's probably 2.5 meters wide here, made up of granite, and it's probably a couple of meters deep at its deepest. And then there's another one that comes around here. You can't quite see it on here, but it goes around here in the modern field system. There's loads of other stuff going on around here as well, but it's a bit of a waste. So that leads to the question of, if it's not a druid sanctuary, what is it? So there's been a few industries on Dartmoor. I've just mentioned the granite quarrying. There was peat cutting as well. But really the biggest thing, and as I mentioned, was mining. And tin mining is hugely important. Dartmour is got probably, you know, some of the biggest and best quality tin reserves in the world. And that goes for Cornwall as well, and northern France and Brittany. This is a tin necklace from a burial dated to 1750 BC from the White Horse Hill Kist. It's made from something like 24 tin studs with woven horsehair. Oh, that's in the wrong place. We'll come back to that. So that's it cleaned up. It's absolutely lovely piece. We've got this as well. So this is the big fat tin bead in the middle of the necklace, with some lovely amber beads and some schist beads as well. There's a little article here, Times of Israel. Isotope work done on a shipwreck found just outside Jerusalem. Links says the tin probably comes from Cornwall. So Cornwall is often used when they say the southwest. They do actually. Dartmoor, I mean, Dartmoor historically, I mean, Devon would have been Cornwall right up until about sometime in the early 9th century anyway. So so when we talk about the tin reserves of the West Country, using the term Cornwall isn't really inaccurate, but often Dartmoor gets forgotten about because it's pretty much only in Dartmoor that it occurs. Dartmoor and the Tamar Valley are the only places you get the mining in Devon, but it's all over Cornwall. Like it's all over Cornwall. I thought you might be interested about these little signs as well.
Yeah, I'm just looking at those. I'm going to have a little look at those.
Because you wouldn't, if these came from Cornwall, this stamping would have happened in Cornwall. They wouldn't have marked the ingots. They would have made the ingots where it was mined. So even if it's a Phoenician script or whatever, it was the person who marked it would have marked it in Britain. So that's very interesting. So I thought you might like that as a little aside.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for that. Yeah.
That's all right. Oh, this is just sort of showing some of the other features on Leadenhall that are there, and I'm not even going to go into some of them because there is so much going on, and again, that isn't on the historic environment record. And for people who just think, oh, you know, it's all been looked at, it's all been found, it hasn't. There's stuff out there that's worthy exploring and worthy trying to wrap your head around and understanding. But you know, you should attack it with a logical brain and see what other people have said before. But then the great thing is you can go out and you can have a look and you can decide for yourself, looking at the evidence, right? Yeah, this is a great big bloody ditch that runs right through all the rock mess on Leadentor. It's an absolutely, it would have been a huge undertaking. And again, it's so obvious, even on the satellite image, you can see this great big stripe through the middle of the thing. I barely mentioned it at first because it speaks for itself, to be honest. But you know, it's not a holloway. It's not an old sunken path. I can tell you that right off because it takes a terrible route, and you would have had to have moved a serious amount of granite in order to do it. So I just don't think the holloway goes around the hill anyway. Just carves its way right through. So this is interesting. I'm just going to jump to Google Earth a second. Hopefully it won't crash or anything. So this is Walkhampton Common. Here we've got a pretty major road. This is the other thing about finding something, you know, I couldn't believe I was finding something that was just so out in the open and so obvious. So this is the main site with the rock lines, with the ditches here, with all of these excavations all around the outside, Bronze Age sites, Bronze Age circles. Just up here was that farm with the Route Rundle settlement and the banks here. You can see the scouring. You see these rock lines are all over the side of this hill coming down.
Yeah.
Right. Or scours, should I say, not rock lines. Anyway. And here's that great big whopping dike as well through the middle of it. Huge. Cool. Oh yeah, that's what I was doing. Got distracted. So when you normally see these settlement walls, you do often see them just around a single house and then other houses on the outside dotted around. What's interesting about this one is that the circle isn't complete, and normally you get complete settlement walls around these things. And we saw over in Route Rundle, even where they built the new farm, you know, they still have the complete original field system. They're very small, not very good fields. But around here, but this one has actually been destroyed by the excavations all around here. But it definitely existed there in the first place, because in between two excavations, the wall still exists. So someone's come later and dug out that wall. And I think this is probably the time. Yeah, I think before we go into that, I'm just going to talk about these excavations that we looked at and the interpretation that there is for them. They are called boulder quarries. They call them boulder quarries. They believe that they were taken out in order to build that road that we've been looking for, or at least a preamble to that road, you know, or build up where it goes around the edge of the hill, you know, build up one side so it's not falling off into the hill. Now, there's something that I can't explain, which is just as someone who lives on Dartmoor, and for any of you, if Dartmoor enthusiasts watch this, when you go to somewhere that is quarried, it gives you a certain feeling just generally around it, and that there is nothing about this that's like a boulder quarry. The most now I'm just talking about feelings, but let's talk about it in terms of facts. There are about 40 of these pits around Leadentor. Not one of them has a sign of granite splitting in it. Now, anyone who knows anything about quarrying on Dartmoor will know that splitting is ubiquitous on the moor, especially where there's quarrying. But even where there aren't big quarries, you will find evidence of the granite splitting, even if it's just on your gatepost for your driveway or whatever. Quarrying. Think about that. 40 quarries, no splitting. So on the moor, we get two types of splitting. The more common one is the more modern method, where you use a pole drill to dig into the granite, and then you put in a wedge and then put a spike in the wedge, and you hammer that, and that splits the rock open. And I think that came about really about with steel. I think the important thing is that you need something pretty hefty to go into the quartz, because granite's a very hard material, or particularly the quartz is very hard. Before that, what they used to do is chisel out slots into the granite, and then put wooden planks in, and then pour water on the wooden plank, and then you go away, and the wood would swell with the water, and the force of it swelling in your slot would then split open the granite. And you can find both examples. The wooden slot method, or that's not the technical term, the wooden slot method is not very common, but you can find examples of it. And anyone could have done that from the Mesolithic onwards, really. You know, all you need is wood and water. You know, you need a hard out your slots that could carve granite in the area. Wouldn't be nice work, but you could do it. And the other modern method with the steel, as I say, is called feather and tear. But as I say, 40 quarries, no sign of splitting. And as I say, you find some of these with these walls. You know, I pointed to a couple of them that have walls. This one, the wall comes around here. Now, if you're quarrying, why the hell would you bury yourself in with waste material? You know, you're never going to get the stuff out. Sometimes there's also, let's find this one. So sometimes they're very close together, and the alls that is between two of these boulder quarries is a very thin bit of earth and rock with some lovely looking boulders in it, you know, which have just been left for some reason. So the pits are not for the exploitation of rock. There's also plenty of rock waste material around them of varying sizes. Also, these people were willing to destroy an ancient monument. They destroyed the wall for their pits, right? Which is full of fantastic rock, by the way, which is all piled together nicely. So why bother? If you're willing to destroy the settlement wall for a boulder quarry, why not just destroy the settlement?
Yeah.
Because it's all there lying on the ground for you. It doesn't make sense, you know. It's very interesting, anyway. But I think this comes to a dating thing, because I think we might have several types of mining going on. So when I thought about mining, I sort of had to look into it. You know, can tin be mined in this way? Can anything be mined in this way? And the first thing I did was sort of, you know, Google sort of water using tin mining. And guess what? Right in the modern day, I think it's in Malaysia, has some of the biggest exploited tin currently. And they use high-powered hoses to blast the top materials off the ground, and they use that water then to also sort the material in the bottom. So it's still used.
Yeah.
Also, we have China clay mining on Dartmoor and in the West Country. In fact, Devon has some of the finest China clay in the world. I think in East Devon, where they've got the good China clay, they do use explosives. But here on Dartmoor and in Cornwall, again, they use water in order to mine and to sort the material. Now, we were talking about a place in Wales earlier. Do you remember the name of it?
I know how to pronounce it once I see it. It is a place called Dolecothi. Dolecothi.
That's the one. So at Dolecothi, we have a Roman gold mine. That's in South Wales, Mid Wales, I think it is. And there is also evidence at said. So yeah, in Wales, in the Bronze Age, we have precedents for this type of mining, basically using water to run down the scours, as we've said, and then collect it in a number of different ways, either through these pits we've been looking at, through the circular constructions, which are either for managing water or for managing materials. And these, oh wow, this is how tin can be mined, and it looks like this is what they were doing here. I kind of shrugged it off because I didn't even know that Bronze Age tinning was something that was not to be, was almost a bit of a no-no on Dartmoor, because they believed that all of the mining evidence had been just came back to this. It was because for the first time I had a bit of pushback. So I'd sort of put the stuff on Facebook, mainly to see if other people had any information about the things that I couldn't find on the historic environment record. I put some stuff on Facebook just because I wanted some feedback as to whether anyone had actually have any interpretations for the man-made stuff. And I didn't actually get any responses. No one seemed to have find them in books, or so it was quite special to say find something which had not been found before. But one thing that did come up was the fact that the what I call the scours, the rock lines, did actually have an interpretation. But the reason I wasn't finding it is because that interpretation wasn't in archaeology, it was in geology. So what what they believe them to be is an example of a periglacial landform called patterned ground. So periglacial meaning next to the glaciers. During the last ice age, or at the end of the last ice age, Dartmoor probably wouldn't have been under the big European glacier. It would have probably been a bit further south, and being next to the glacier would have suffered a long period of some pretty extreme weather conditions, backwards and forwards between freezing temperatures and warmer temperatures. And there is no doubt that Dartmoor is a periglacial landscape in many ways. We get a lot of the features that appear in other periglacial environments. What they call the rock lines, or clitter streams, or rock streams, is one of these landforms called patterned ground. But there's problems with that. So here are some examples. I don't know how well you can see, so we'll have a look at this one. Oh God, that's not a very much bigger image. But I'll have to explain quite a lot of them. You get these lines of rock, and there's some similarities to what we see on Leiden Tor. But what we can see is that all these places, this is deposited material. The rock is on the surface. It's not within the ditches. It's not been exposed somehow like it has on Leiden Tor. This is all deposited material. Even here. Now, you do get some examples. I'll have to talk about soil heave as well. So let's see if we can go back here. So things like this, called thurfers, and there's a really nice example somewhere. And we get thurfers on Dartmoor as well. And it's quite funny because when you look at them in China or on Great Mist Tor, which is on Dartmoor, the thurfers look identical. Like it's remarkable. It's clearly the same feature. But when you look at these rock lines of patterned ground, of this deposited rock material, you start to notice that it is very different to what we get on Dartmoor. Very, very different. I put this stuff up against a friend of mine he's quite a logical guy, and likes to think about him quite skeptically. And I showed him this stuff, expecting him to sort of be like, "Oh well, yeah, I can see the similarity," and he just went, "This is nothing alike."
Right. Yeah.
He was.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
It's so very different.
Yes.
And I think the main important point. So I made a very similar point to someone who should have been able to respond to me better. That that this is an effect of the soil, and the response was soil heave. Now, soil heave is a periglacial effect, much like the thurfers. They are lumps of soil that come up by this repeated freeze-thaw action. And again, the same is true of the soil heave and the surface. So repeated freeze-thaw action is which has caused these patterns, these shapes. What's interesting is though with the history of Dartmoor geology is that they are very much certain this is about rock lines. This is about sorted rock. It's not about the soil, and I would argue it is about the soil and not the rock. I think I need to make this point repeatedly, and I'm sorry if I repeat myself loads on it. So this is from a paper which is actually looking at Leiden Tor in specific, which it was great to find. Unfortunately, the paper was mainly about using technologies in order to map periglacial landforms. It's not actually about periglacial landforms. It's about UAVs. It's about different types of remote sensing technologies and things. One of the technologies they use captures where the rock is. Now, this has nothing to do with the rock. It's to do with the scour. And if they'd done this, they would have got, they don't use LiDAR at all in this paper, which is very strange, I think. Can you see I have highlighted this area in yellow? So this is the same place in all 4 images. And if you look, there's this separate scour. I think it's quite obvious. It's like a later scour. And it's sort of like, it's a bit longer than all the others. It's a bit more straight and organized. It's a bit messier else places.
Yeah,
what's interesting is that this area, this defines, this is the big pit that I found in the beginning. And that's the little pit next to it. The furthest extremity of this would go into this pit, and the furthest extremity of this would go into this pit. So this is probably one of the most recent scours, and it's directly related to those first 2 features that I mentioned. You can see what's really annoying is they mention the boulder quarries in this, and they say, oh, you should just ignore them because they're just boulder quarries for the road. But they're talking about these rock lines, and they don't mention that there's 100% correlation between the boulder quarries and the rock lines. They just don't mention it. It's very strange. Like, I don't know if it's just because no one looked, but they are clearly related. And interpretation for one needs to be an interpretation for both. None of those boulder quarries are there without one of those rock lines pouring into the end of it, right? So this is that feature again. This is that fan of scouring. I'm sort of down at an angle here, and this is its definitions here. I'll draw one I've squiggled on. This is the pit here, and this is its overflow here, and this is an overflow here. Yeah. So here's it all marked out. Very badly. And again, if these are natural lines of sorted rock, if we have a pit here, which is clearly designed for water, and down from it's an overflow, and that this water scour here looks identical on the ground to a periglacial line of clitter. Well, hold on. Hold on a minute. It's the same thing, but this is a water scour and this isn't, apparently. This is the Great Western Reeve. It's built directly over the scour. So if the reeve was about 1300 BC, which is sort of what they reckon, then this mining predates it. So I think that's just a very brief point. I'm going to get back onto the scours at some point. What's interesting, though, is at some places, this is on the Walkhampton Common Reeve, you'll see that the reeve goes across the screen here. It's a very rocky area. It goes across the screen this way. And then a rock line, a scour, comes through here and out the other side of it. And what's interesting is that where the scour goes through, there's hardly any soil built up here. Yeah, the soil's been washed away. So clearly water was running through here, which possibly makes it contemporary with the Walkhampton Common Reeve rather than before it. So there are clues to dating, but I don't really want to get into dating. I just want to present what's there.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So this is my main argument against sorted rock, right?
Yeah.
You will find ground like this. So we can see a sorted rock line coming down this side, rock line coming down this side. Like the ones we looked at earlier, the ground level is lower in the rock lines, so the rock is exposed. If you look at the grassy areas in between, the rock is just peeking under the
Yeah.
surface.
Yeah.
It's all there, and these are very rocky areas, right? In terms soil heave, and so what they're claiming is that the soil has heaved up in these areas and not in the other areas, and that's what forms the patterning. But that's already arguing against decades of Dartmoor geology, which has said this is sorted rock. It's not soil, it's not sorted soil, it's sorted rock. But we
Right.
can tell right here that this is not sorted rock. This is a mess of rock and different soil levels, right? Now, my problem with soil heave as an argument, not just because you're already arguing against Dartmoor geology, because I'm arguing against Dartmoor geology. I'm saying it's archaeology, not geology. Another problem with soil heave is that it doesn't account for, and this comes up with every time where someone comes up with a really good natural explanation for what could have caused the scours. If you took the soil level down to the center of the sorting of rock visible, it would be a jumble, a morass of rock. It would be a complete mess. There is no patterned ground with concerns to the granite. There is absolutely no patterning in the granite. There's patterning to the depth of the soil. Okay? So when this person responded to me, but what about all that man-made stuff? It's natural. I was like, but why is there all this man-made stuff? Why is there a pit at the end of every single line? Why is there these big banks? Why is there these ditches? What's going on? So I started playing a little game when it came to water scours and periglacial lines of clitter, and I started capturing images of both and seeing if we could tell the difference. So these are my three goes. One of these is a periglacial line of clitter, one of them's a scour from a ground, and one of them's a dried up farmer's ditch. This is one of my favourites here. It looks just like the effect on Lead and Tor, but this is a scour from a spring and not a periglacial line of clitter. And the thing is that geologists only use the faculties that me and you have. They don't go and test this soil to see if it's periglacial lines of clitter. They just look at it and we can look at it and go, no, this is a scour of water. Yeah. So really, the next thing was to find more evidence. I found this one site, and I'll always refer back to Lead and Tor. And Lead and Tor is really special because it's like a map key. It's got the most evidence on it. So you can go. So none of the other sites have all the stuff Lead and Tor has, but it will have at least two, if not three, if not four of the things, and each one will have one of those different things that you'll find on Lead and Tor. So it's like as I say, like a map key. It's the key to understanding the rest of the sites. So straight away we go to Sharpetor. Now South Sharpetor is literally across the road from Lead and Tor. Lead and Tor's just up here, right? Just across the road. It's got these fabulous scours all the way around the outside of it. One thing that makes me again think it's not natural is that right here in this gap on the southeast of it, there's no scours whatsoever. This is the same hill going down the, it's kind of flat here, to be honest. This is a steeper hill here than this is. And there's nothing here, but it's all around here, which means it's directed. People have been looking in a particular place. The LiDAR is absolutely stunning. So, look here again, this is the blank spot where no one's done any scouring. You can see all these scours coming all the way around the hill. It's absolutely fantastic. And also you can see there's excavations as well going around. This is what the hush looks like on the ground. Oh, sorry, hush is a mining term used when you use water to seek out a load of material. And you get medieval mining like that in Wales and in Yorkshire as well, and the Durham Moors, I think it is. They use water again, basically to mine out the lead. So this is what the scour looks like on Sharpator. This is an interesting one. So again, this is clearly a water scour, right? The water's still running down it. So there's a rock line over here. There's a rock line over here, which were apparently caused at the end of the last ice age by freeze-thaw action. But this rock line in the middle was caused by a water scour, and the only difference is it's currently got water running down it. That's the only difference between the two, morphologically speaking.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So, right, okay. That's another nice little scour there in Sharpator, and we've got the excavations again as well. Big pits in the ground, clearly man-made. The hill. The scours are just above it. Here's another one. This rock sort of looks like it's been split, but there's no evidence of splitting. And again, there's been a wall built up on one side.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So what I think with all these other pits is you basically have water coming in one end, eroding out the material, and then you capture it. You can either let the water out in one big rush to continue clearing, or you can collect up materials, or you can do both. These ones are a bit further away on Sharpator. These ones are strange because these look identical to like streaming heaps. Like in that first picture we looked at.
Yes.
Yeah, but these are on the side of the hill. They're not on a river valley. It's really odd, and there's no scours above them. And again, I can't find any mention in historic environment records. So even if these are nothing to do with tinning, it's bizarre. Like huge pits, which people have not really looked at. So here's something pretty fantastic. This is Sharpator again that we're looking at. You can see all the scours coming down. Here are a lot of excavations, and this pool here is called Goldstone Pool, right? And people have had different interpretations for it, like it's a dew pool dug so the animals can drink, or it's someone thought it might have been one of Dartmoor's sacred pools. But when I think you look at it at this angle, it just looks like part of a tinning system. You've got water and materials coming down here that go to the pool, and then you've got another system that comes off from the pool down the side of the hill, evidenced by these streams here. And there's still water running down, and it still comes down like here, runs into this area. And then that's Goldstone at the top, and you've got all of these rock lines, scours coming down the side of the hill from there. So this is from a survey by a chap called Phil Newman. And you've got these are granite and are currently undated and uninterpreted, according to his survey. Okay. Now, that image doesn't really help us much, but let's have a look at this on the LiDAR. One semicircle, two semicircles, just like we saw in Route Rundle.
Yeah.
One semicircle, two semicircles, right? So if you walk along here as well, it's interesting. So all this stuff goes down towards Goldstone Pool. When you get to a certain point, the watershed changes and anything starts moving this way. So there's a number of ditches which then direct stuff down into these bits here, right? And again, you've got a whole new system that runs down this way, but these two here collect anything that's coming off this way.
Yeah.
Right,
Well.
and could also. So this is actually a good time to jump back to my little rogue picture that was in the wrong place, which I said we'd come back to. So hopefully you caught me just talking about these semicircular dams. This is actually one on Leadentor, which I only found recently. So there's still stuff to be found in that place. It's amazing. The underbrush covers a lot of it. So this is one reason I really wanted to get this video done now, is because this time of year, the underbrush is quite well died back, and it's only really the grass that started to grow again. And even on the high areas, not even that started. So now's a really good time to go and look at this stuff. Like, don't take my word for it. Don't take archaeologists' word for it. Don't take geologists' word for it. Go and look at it yourself. And now's the time to do that. Be careful. It's dodgy ground often, very rocky. So watch your ankles, but really go and have a look at it. Go and see how the rock lines relate to the stuff. go and look at this on Lead and Tour. Look, there's the coordinates. So this is a rock line coming down here. Sorry, a scour coming down here. There's another one here. Unfortunately, this blue spot sort of masks it, but this is the end of it here, and it goes up that way. And what we have here, starting around there and going round here, and you can see it all on the ground. You can't see it all on the satellite, and you can't see it on LiDAR at all. But it's a small granite wall. There's either the earth has not been put on it or it's eroded off. It's right next to settlement buildings, settlement walls. And again, it's this semicircular shape, and the scour literally comes right into the center of it and terminates in the middle of it. Right. Tell me what else it is. Okay, so this is again not very far away. All the sites I'm talking about, you can see them from each other. You know, it's all pretty much crammed into one area. And where you find these rock lines, whether you think they're periglacial landform or not, is generally concentrated on the southwest of the moor. You don't really see them in other parts, which was again makes me question their natural origin. Why isn't it spread more evenly over the landscape? But here's Crambator. We can see these absolutely fantastic rock lines all going down in sort of this direction. There doesn't seem to be any on these sides. See these dots here? This is all medieval open cast mining. So when they finished exploiting the streamed rivers, by the way, up here we can see a very heavily streamed river. You can see the escarpment cut here, and then this is all chewed up with a very small river in the middle. When they stopped being able to exploit the rivers, they first had to go underground for it. And basically they decide where to dig and literally just dig a bloody great hole in the ground and dig it out of the top. So the interesting thing about tin is that the purest stuff is found closest to the surface. So those shallow deposits are really worth doing. What's interesting about tin is, as you say, as it gets rarer, you've got to go deeper. But as you get deeper, it gets poorer quality. So there's always a drive in demand. Depending on what the demand is, people will go deeper for the tin. But you are not getting even that same cream, basically. La creme.
Yeah.
You know, that's what these people would have been taking off the, you know, they're not deep scours. They're not really digging into the lode. They're just taking the cream off the top. That's what I think, as far as I know, right? And I think they're using groundwater to do it. Dartmoor is riddled with groundwater. You can find a bog on the side of a steep hill, right? Okay, it's everywhere, right? You can't avoid it. And in fact, it's sometimes, even if you're experienced on the moor, you'll stick to paths and trackways because you know it's just not worth going off them, because you'll just end up in mess. And if water in rivers sorts tin, why can't groundwater on the side of hills sort tin as well?
Yeah.
You know, I'm not a geologist, but this is the way my brain is with it. Right? That's the absolutely same, right? So here again, we see the scouring. This is actually a medieval leap, but also for the purposes of mining, right? So people are after tin in this area. To say that people are after tin in this area is not a crazy suggestion, right? Here's the medieval mining in the top right.
Yeah.
And then all of these, look at these semicircular ditches, loads of them. Look, there's even a double one very faintly here. But these are all doubles. And again, you can actually only see one or two of these now on the ground. But again, it's the same materials, granite. It's kind of rough construction. And again, it's related to these scoutmen just down here. And I didn't mention on Sharpator as well, although it's very near Leadentor, there's also more Bronze Age settlements. They're all, for people who don't know, they're all actually very close together. They're sort of presented as separate tribes almost often by archaeologists. I don't think I'm exaggerating by saying that. They sort of represent them these separate groups. But they're virtually cheek by jowl. You know, in terms of subsistence farmers, they're way too close together, and there's some evidence for that as well, which I'll go into in a bit, right? This is the rock lines, which are again very similar as they are in other places. They are scours in the ground. They're not deposited rock on the surface. This is actually, you can't see very well, but this is the bank. This is a rocky bank. You can see that someone's built this material up. You know, this is not a natural feature, which I think is clear from the LiDAR, but it's worth. Now, this is a flaw in my hypothesis, but in some places there's always a suggestion of water. So here at Cranbertor, right at the bottom of the tour, there's this mass of this bog grass, and it's very wet here. Like, there is definitely a suggestion there was a lot of groundwater here at one point or another. This is one of my favorites. So again, if we're ticking off boxes of things we find on Lead and Tour, we can tick off scours, you know.
Yeah.
We can tick off Bronze Age settlement as well, right in the middle of it. You know, it's absolutely fantastic looking, this one. It looks great.
Yeah.
Again, fortunately, there isn't much sign of any water here, but there is a boggy spot at the top.
Oh, okay.
But the most interesting feature is this here. Looks like a little roundhouse, but it ain't. This
Okay.
is the LiDAR. Again, we can see these are scours, right? It's very interesting patterns here as well. These lines, which I think is to do with waste and water material coming down this way. This is what that feature looks like. It looks just like the circular things on Lead and Tour. Again, we can see the scour coming down. It's right at the end. Absolutely lovely. And again, just like the features as well. On Lead and Tour. So here's the Devonport Leat. This is Cranbertor's just off to the east that we've seen before. Is this Raddock Hill? I think this is called Raddock Hill. And or at least the hill around the corner is called Raddock Hill. But anyway, again, we've got rock lines, we've got settlement buildings. Sorry, these aren't some very good pictures, these ones. Again, we can see it's the scouring effect. And here, this is a bit of a rough one. This is very rocky coming down here. So if people know it, they'll know it's sort of fairly treacherous even at the best of times. There's a lot of rock, a lot of water, and it's pretty steep. And you sort of come, this section here on the left, marked it out. Here we go. This section on the left is the side. There's a leat coming down here. This is the Devonport Leat. And this has been sort of built up on the side of it to contain the leat. So this is all modern coming up here. But again, what you have is like slightly destroyed by this leat building is you've got a rounded area at the top, flat open at one end. We've got a waste pile of rock, and then in this yellow line, this is a wall at the front of it. It's just like the boulder quarries on Lead and Tour, right? And there's probably way more stuff out here on the hill, but it's, as I say, it's pretty dodgy, and I've only been there recently in bad weather, so I haven't been able to look at this stuff. But I bet there's more evidence of waste piles and excavations on this hill, but it is dodgy. So warning to anyone who's there. So that's just a better view of the. This is just without the lines. This is the wall. It's clearly something constructed round. Here's a waste pile, and that's the excavation to the left. Yeah, this is the plantation. This is definitely Raddock Hill Plantation, I think. Oh, again, my name's confused. But again, we've got rock lines. We've got Bronze Age settlements. It's really fascinating when you're in here, the way that the settlement walls interact with the rock lines. Like, they seem to be, a lot of them seem to be these little blocks off areas which don't have entrances or exits. And you think it's actually about managing water and waste, I think, and your materials. So this is just more of the LiDAR, just to show that, again and again, these are scours into the ground. It's not sorted rock, deposited rock, right? Hey, so this is a place called Islesbarrow. A lot of this is scheduled ancient monument.
Yeah.
These are your medieval open cast pits following a line. There's quite a few of them. And then a lot of this is Victorian mining. You know, this is post-industrial. They would have, I think, had wheels and things for pumping water, going into the ground, open casts as well as going underground as well. Included in the scheduling Can you see these here?
Yes, yes.
Two
Yep.
semicircular banks.
Uh-huh.
They don't know when to date them to, but they call them miners' reservoirs, which is interesting.
Ah,
Um, they think it's to do
okay.
with the streaming that's below, because this river down here has been heavily streamed. But I think it's to do with the scouring that's still visible up here,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yes.
Which
Take
probably would
the
have.
yeah,
But as I say, there's always a connection between the scouring, the the works,
yeah.
and then a river below. Like they manage both systems at once. You know, maybe use water from one to flush the other one as well. You know, which is a point I'll make later as well. This is a picture of Isles Barrow. I think it was just to see if we could see the actual marks. I went back in time on Google Earth Pro. It's great for picking out different features and seeing like different crop colors and things like that. Here we go again. This is Little Miztor. Again, we've got scours down here and two semicircular earth granite banks. Again, I can't find these on the historic environment record, and I don't know why. They're pretty obvious. They're up here as well. There's a roundhouse that's 20 meters in diameter. Right, 20 meters. It's absolutely massive. So this is the same place again. You can sort of see, you can't really see the scours so well, but you can see the banks quite well here.
Okay, yeah, yeah, definitely.
Oh, this place is interesting. This is called sort of a Horsiat, and this is a roundhouse. This one's like 15 meters in diameter. It's absolutely huge. This is where there's a water scour, which isn't a periglacial line of glitter.
Yeah,
Okay, it's a
yeah,
water scour,
yes.
but it looks very much like a periglacial line of
Right,
glitter.
all right,
And
right.
then all along here, there's evidence of more lines, which I assume are periglacial lines of glitter. you know, and excavations, all in that area. It's a very interesting area and connected to a much larger system, which I'm trying to show on Google Earth later. Here's just another example of. So this is dry in the summer, which means there's grass in it. So when there's no water running down here, look, there's even a horseshoe-shaped pit here at the
Yes,
top.
yes, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, but this is clearly a water scour because it's got water in it. But in the summer, is it a periglacial line of glitter? you know,
Right,
you
right, right.
know. Okay.
Yeah, I'm with you.
That's a sort of a wider shot. So this is so here we go, a publication from the 90s, pattern of prehistoric settlement of sites. Now, I don't mean to blow my own trumpet, but he did a statistical analysis of the distribution of settlement buildings, and he basically to sort of sum it up, in the western part of the moor where we've been looking, the density is far too high for subsistence farmers on such poor quality ground, even considering the better climate that they would have had in the Bronze Age. And as you can see, the last line of this is, because pastoral activities fail to explain all aspects of the settlement pattern, it is concluded that many of the largest settlements were linked with tin extraction. Right.
Yeah.
So I don't think anything I'm saying is that outrageous, but it is getting met. And so, this is a bit big. But I think this sort of shows the problem that there's been, is that indeed, until the recent revival of an interest in tin extraction, the so-called where's that? Hold on. The so-called pastoral hypothesis has been championed to the virtual exclusion of an alternative. So basically, because there's such a concentration on the agricultural activities of the Bronze Age peoples, that they just don't even want to think about tinning. And definitely since the 90s and since this paper, there is this, oh well, they probably were tinning, But you can see that this whole idea of the pastoral hypothesis is still hangs heavy over our local archaeology. It's still very much these Bronze Age
Yes.
people were farming, which of course they were farming. They were bloody farmers. You know, they got their food
Yeah.
from farming. Everyone, we still farm. Like, it doesn't mean our main occupation is farming.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's why I'm interested in anything else. Yeah.
So it's yeah, yeah, okay. So that's a back to some. So this was just to show, but this was just to show how close some sites were. So this is Cranbertor with its many, many banks here. And then this was the Radic Hill where there's scouring, settlement, more scouring, and another uh, lead and boulder quarry, so to speak. That's the dog. Oh, this is an interesting site. So this is just the other side of the water from Radic Hill. There's a settlement down here, which I always assumed to be to do with the river tinning. And I didn't notice that right behind it, there was scouring. And like, I'm not saying that wherever there's settlements, there's scouring. However, I'm starting to think that on the southwest quadrant of Dartmoor, I'd be really surprised to see what you call periglacial lines of clitter without a settlement building within 100 meters of it. And there's no reason for that if they are just natural features. There's just no reason for that. This is this is where this is on Google Earth when Dartmoor was apparently on Mars. So I don't know what's going on here. But
Yeah.
again, it's just to show the scouring effect. This really shows up how much work is done to the river valley as well. Like it's met, you know, this could represent thousands of years' work in itself. So this scouring could also represent hundreds, if not thousands of years. You know, and I think that's why we find these different effects. Oh, here's another. This is on the side of Leadentor. Again, we've got the same sort of shape. We've got a. Oh, actually, no, this is not. This is even better. Sorry. This is just like the Leadentor boulder quarries. So it's found. This is scoured ground. There's a rock line that comes into the top of it. It's got that same rounded off shape. This one even has a waste pile to the left. There's another scour that comes down the side, which you can see on the right. But it's nowhere bloody near Leadentor and it's nowhere near the road.
Yeah.
It's in fact nowhere near anything that would have needed boulders quarried for it. And in fact, all the boulders are nicely piled next to the hole in the ground. Right? They weren't after the boulders. This is a really interesting place. So I have included a few. I generally, with all these places, I like to look at them on the satellite. I like to look at them on LiDAR, and I like to go and look at them. And because with all three things, you can see things that you can't necessarily see with the other. But three of them together kind of don't cover all bases, but it really helps. Here's pretty much everywhere I've shown up till now, I've been to and had a look at and had a look for other, you know, effects. But places here now which I haven't actually. And here at What Oak, it's in the middle of nowhere, right? There is 94 settlement buildings there. 94 on the side of a really barren hill.
Yeah.
Yeah. Heavily streamed river at the bottom. This is the River Tavy. And what these little dots are all along the side of the top of the hill here are the settlement buildings. And you can see they've got all these marks from them. Now, I'll talk about these in a minute, but let's just have a look on the satellite at that. This is from a slightly different angle. I've just turned it around a bit. But look, you've got all these lines, which I imagine look like places where there's no undergrowth growing because it's scoured and rocks have been revealed. That's what I imagine it looks like, but I haven't been to see it. And look, they're right at, where do they all terminate? Right by the fucking right by the roundhouses, right? So again, this is the same pattern that we're finding in these other places. However, these bigger scours, so there is a lot of peat cutting in the area. and this could be peat cutting, but I'm also intended to think that it's not. It's actually tin scouring because of the way it's always directed downhill.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it looks different to the more industrial peat cutting stuff, but I don't know, maybe someone knows better. But even if this is peat cutting, what the hell is going on with these lines, and why did they build their settlement buildings right at the end of them? And why does it look like every other place where we find these lines and the settlement buildings together? Ah, right. This is fantastic. This is White Tor, and I can't get here, but this is just absolutely amazing. You've got what looks like a cut into the ground with where the water comes out. It overflows here. There seems to be even a wall crossing that where it overflows, possibly a damming method. Then it goes out into this big fan and then scours this big wide area. And you've got like two of them together. You've got the settlement buildings right amongst the scours, just like as we have at the other sites. The only difference is these ones seem to have water running down them, which is fab.
Yeah.
And the reason I've got this image is this is on the other side of White Tor, where there's more scouring evident, is in amongst the farm, you seem to have things that look like boulder quarries in inverted commas. So one thing I want to show is just how close some of these sites are together and how they could interrelate as well. Oh, much better at doing this on my phone. So, right, this is Walkhampton Common.
Okay.
This is the Leiden Tor site. This is Sharper Tor. This is Goldstone Pool. And this is Horsiat, where the 15-meter diameter roundhouse is. All down this area, I think this system runs into this system that runs into this system. I think that this system runs into this system that runs down into that system, and it runs down this way as well. These aren't just like individual sites. These are whole massive areas that have water flowing between them and materials. When you look on the lidar for this bottom area of Sharper Tor, and if you just walk it, it's just like full of these straight like lumps and bumps and ditches and wet areas. Across this, so let's have a look. See if look at this. This is sort of a main bridleway that goes down here. Look how can you see how the puddles that go across them are sort of horizontal across it?
Right. Yeah.
And they are connected to the gaps in the underbrush, which are again in line with these up here. This is all the same effect. It all runs into the same place, and it's all about managing them. Going back to that antiquarian, Sabine Baring Gould, do you know the name? So he's, you might have come across him because he's responsible for the English Lives of the Saints.
Okay.
He did all of the Lives of the Saints. He did all of that,
Right.
and loads of interesting British documents and things like that. And he did books on Cornwall, Dartmoor, Wales, I believe, as well, possibly Cumbria, Yorkshire, I think. I could be wrong, but I've only really read the Devon and Cornwall ones, or Dartmoor, actually, more specifically. But he did stuff on inscriptions and crosses and things as well. He says something really salient, that he says that it's for any person who has eyes to see and a brain for which to process the information, it is evident that every single waterway on Dartmoor has been worked for tin. Right, every single one. And he's right. And you start looking, it literally, even the smallest dribble of water, you can see that something's been moved around. And these whole areas are wet and boggy, and they all feed into each other. And I just can't express that. And then if we go across here, we move east. Oh, maybe we move east. and we're at this Raddick Hill area. It's all close in together. You move east again and you're in Crambator. It's just all in the same areas, all connected by these stream works, all connected by settlements. And that was something that was really interesting about the distribution of settlements before. Is if you could say, okay, yeah, some of them were tinning, and they're the ones by the river. You still had loads of these odd settlements on the side of hills, you know, and which don't seem connected and seem out. They're connected by the scoured ground. When you plonk the scoured ground in amongst that, suddenly all these places now are, you know, part of one sort of large group, you know, and that's something I really want to get across. Is that you can't underestimate the scale of it. So the biggest mining works of this scale is a place called Los Medulas in Spain, which is also a Roman era gold mine. And they basically washed away a mountain, essentially. It's pretty fantastic. And I've done some basic measurements of the sort of areas that this covers, and it's way bigger than Los Medulas, way bigger. Like, I just can't get across that every site you start ticking those boxes of things you find on Leiden Tour. You find the scours, you find the settlement, and then you start to find either a relationship to another settlement and a streaming river, or you find all these various what's the word I'm looking for? Infrastructure, you know, mining infrastructure, whether it's the ditches and the banks. I've even I've got some more images. They don't seem to be on here. I don't know where they are. At the bottom of Leiden Tour, right by this car park here, there's even just, so let's go down to here. So we've got the smaller settlement wall here, and right here, just on the outside of it, is a big pit. And you can see that it's part of it's been built up to sort of make it a pit, because you can see the rock poking through the ground still. And then that sort of, it has a dip at one end, so it rolls down the hill and again goes into another semicircular bank, which is literally just here. And again, I can't find any mention of it on the historic environment record. There's another interesting relationship between the mining and the Walkhampton Common Reeve here, in as much as one of these boulder quarries absolutely smashes up the Walkhampton Common Reeve. So again, just like with this settlement wall at the back, if they're quite happy knocking down ancient monuments for rocks, why didn't they just knock down ancient monuments for rocks? There's no reason you would climb up the side of this hill to dig boulders out of the ground when there's boulders lying around on the ground next to where you're working, you know. So these ones here, which are right by the road, I wouldn't be surprised if these were extended and used as borrow pits or something for when they did build the road. You know, they might have just grabbed some materials out of here. But what's quite funny actually is when the road is here, this ground level is lower. They had to build up the road here, so this was already been taken out before someone's put a road in. You know,
Yeah.
so they weren't taking it out of here to build up. You know, anyway, I won't stress that point. But when you get to over here, this is quite up a steep rocky hill. If you want to move material from up here down to here, it's going to be an absolute nightmare, you know. And where it isn't boggy, it's grassy, and it's, you know, it's just not easy to traverse. There's no way you can get vehicles up and down. So what sort of size boulders you can, even a horse and cart, you know, you wouldn't be able to shift it up and down that hill. It's too rocky, you know, it's too dodgy. So the idea of these are boulder quarries is ridiculous. So yeah, anyway, that's that one. And I think that's all I was going to go for that bit. So maybe we can move on to something else. I might just have a cup of tea. I'm going to round up on this site because I think it just shows a lot of interesting things. We've got So if you've ever seen the movie Warhorse, it was filmed near here. Isn't that
Yeah.
lovely? Yeah, there's an old farm
Right.
down here it was filmed at. Um, so we've got these scours. We had that round circular sort of basin or reservoir, or I've heard people suggest inspection pits or something like that. Here we have the Drizzlecombe Monument. If you're into your megaliths, this is my recommendation. It's a Bronze Age area, Bronze Age settlement, probably predating this stuff, but you know, I can't say for certain. It's got a great big cairn called the Giant's Basin, um, and a few stone rows, and two of them have massive terminus stones. One of them is particularly big. I think it's the second biggest stone on Dartmoor, called the Bone Stone, and it's absolutely fab. Really recommend that. We've got the really heavily streamed river, and up from here is I think the Isles Barrow mine, where we saw the two of our ditch and banks up there, are up this way. But I think it's interesting now that we can possibly like answer some of these questions about Dartmoor archaeology. So can we say these people were mining tin? Hell yeah, they built their settlements right on top of their tin mines. Their settlements were part of their tin mines. Why did they build on weird, rough clitter fields, rocky ground? Well, it wasn't like that before they got there. They actually scoured it off and revealed the rock, possibly then used it as building material for their settlements as well. They knew what they were doing when they were building their settlements. They built those massive blocks and then built huge amounts of rubble then around them, and then soil and earth. And I think now we can say that they had the time and effort to do that because they were digging out tin and selling it, which would have been the most valuable material at the time, whilst these people were here. Save for gold, there might be other materials, but in terms of metals, gold and tin is the most valuable things in the world. And we're on a tin hotspot, right? So we have precedent for Bronze Age hydraulic mining in Wales. We have precedents for hydraulic tin mining as something that people do. We have precedents for tin mining on Dartmoor. We have precedents of people using water for tin mining on Dartmoor.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything I'm suggesting which is wildly outrageous. That the people living here, loads of people living here, really densely inhabiting this landscape, in a landscape which is packed full of tin, at a time when tin is the most valuable material, one of the most valuable materials in the world.
Yeah.
To say that they were mining tin is not outrageous, and to say that we might have missed some of the tinning, I don't think is outrageous either. We know, I think they built these big houses as well to keep the water out. I think that's another reason, because water was moving all around and they were using it a lot. One thing that comes up in the statistical analysis is about how many houses are on the slope. And I think if you put water into the equation, it makes sense why they had them on the slope. So all these sort of things become cleared up. Why they're placed, how they're placed, and what they're doing is as I say, it's not outrageous to say that tin mining happened on Dartmoor. Now, I've had some really good help from some people, so I'd like to give a bit of a shout out as well, like Volcanic on the Snake Bros Discord. I mean, he's been a great help, and I've also been in contact with a geologist who works at Camborne School of Mines, and both of them. I bring them up first. I will do sort of mention a few more people in a bit, but they've both suggested that we could be looking at gold mining rather than tin mining. And in the context of Los Medulas and the Welsh site, that seems to make sense. Point being that basically pick it straight out of the river, straight off the ground without having to process it. It is gold, it's ready to go because of how reactive or not gold is, and by the sorting action of water as well. you know, the native gold is much more likely to come across and for people to understand what to do with. But if we go with the dating for these roundhouses at around 1500 BC, and we say that mining is around this period as well, then we're not looking at we might be looking at the earliest extant mining on Dartmoor, but we're not looking at the earliest mining on Dartmoor. They were mining copper at Great Orme in North Wales for 500 years before 1500 BC. So there could have been much more tin and gold mining on Dartmoor way before this. Although it might, as I say, this might represent the earliest extant mining, but not the earliest mining. This would have been, say, 500 years possibly into the mining history, if not, if gold was, native gold appears, in that way. But so as I say, this is the period where tin was very valuable. So that's why, they're more experienced than me and know more about geology and mining than me. But I'm disagreeing more from sort of a dating logic perspective rather than a technical perspective. And I think that's pretty much all the points I want to make. But yeah, I just want to say that if it wasn't for someone like Ross Broadstock, I wouldn't have had like a different way of thinking for sort of like looking at stuff. And if it wasn't, for Snake Bros, Russ and Kyle, I wouldn't have had these eyes for like some really positive responses from quite a few people. I've joined a map and lidar curiosities Facebook group and they've been really great help as well. So yeah.
So one thing that people ask me quite a lot whenever I sort of start to share this stuff with them is, have you spoken to an archaeologist at all? And I have. I met with Lee Bray of DMPA Archaeology, that's Dartmoor National Park Authority Archaeology, sometime in February, and we did a walk around this part of Leiden Tor and Sharper Tor as well. It was certainly an interesting little walk. We had a look at quite a few things, and Lee was certainly surprised that that I had actually found a couple of things that weren't listed on his he had a map with sort of highlighted the scheduled areas, and so he was quite surprised to find a few bits with me, and he asked me to find the what am I talking about? GPS coordinates for them. So hopefully he can go towards getting them sort of recorded. He didn't give an overall sort of weigh in on the interpretation of the features that we looked at. He sort of gave a very good cryptic sort of, there's something that we clearly don't understand about the landscape, I think were his words, which was, fair enough. But what was most interesting was actually his initial responses to some of the features when he came across them. So when we had a look at these, so as I say, me and Lee looked at about 3 of these, but I think there's about 5 or 6 on the hill in total, plus obviously the very similar looking feature at Whittenall's Rocks. When he first looked at them, he's struggling to find the word to describe them. I don't think either of us actually know what they're called, but we get them. So where the groundwater starts to run into the valleys, they've started doing this thing where they put in small little stone dams, and it has sort of a dual effect of not only decreasing flooding down in the valleys, but also creating little habitats for pond life and insects, all sorts of things. So it's sort of an agreed all-round good thing to do for nature. It has a good few positive features. He was saying now, it's not one of them, but this is sort of what it looks like. And he's right, they're just sort of dry stone granite. But what's really interesting is his mind immediately leapt to the management of water, which is what I'm saying these are for. He could see that these look like channels for water running down, and this is somehow a way of capturing or storing or stopping it from going into this area. And then you can either break it down to let out a sudden, whoosh of water or whatever. But this is sort of immediately what his mind went to was the management of water, which I thought was interesting. When we came to look at these, it wasn't actually these in particular that he was talking about, but we came across. So I've said before, these come in all sizes. So some of them are absolutely huge, and some of them are only, a meter long, half a meter wide, maybe half a meter deep again as well. But again, they've got the rock line running up to the end of it. You can see it's the same feature, just on a different scale. And when he looked at it, he went, I know, I've seen something like this. I think I know what this is. And he described a method of water erosion. So you get it when you see potholes on the side of hills. One end gets deeper into the hill and the other end is sort of flat as it goes down the hill. And as water continues to run down, it makes on the sort of high end of it washes it down and makes it bigger and bigger up the hill. And he said, yeah, that's what it looks like. And again, I have to completely agree with them, because I think this is the method used in order to dig these things. They start out one end, and then as they're washing the water down, they're excavating it further and further back up the hill. So again, his mind immediately jumped to water, to water erosion, and to this sort of organic process. And I think that's why there's so much confusion about these features in the past, is because the organic process of water erosion has been used to create these features. So as I say, that's why people just immediately jump to a natural interpretation especially for the lines. I don't think I mentioned earlier an interpretation for these walls either. There's actually quite a few of these which have a wall at the end, not all of them. Sometimes the wall is in the middle of it as well. And but again, I think it's about stopping the water. If you have the end blocked up like this, you can control how much water goes over the edge. You can store your heavier materials like your ores down in here and dig them out at your will, whilst letting your wastewater and flow over the top. It can also be used again as another little reservoir. That's the other benefit. If you want to mine further down the hill, you've got a nice store ready-made for water. But yeah, so that was the response from the archaeologists that I've spoken to. Hopefully I'll speak to more in future. But generally, from people who I've got a response from, it's been, how should we say, polite but dismissive. We don't have the money, we don't have the time, and you're probably wrong. There's no evidence of ancient tinning. So yeah, that's that.